Part 3. Secession. After seceding and declaring themselves sovereign in 1860, South Carolina demanded that the Union Army must vacate the forts surrounding Charleston Bay. After all, the Northern Army was no longer protecting Charleston's ports, but rather acting as a captor, holding Southern cargo ships hostage. Abner Doubleday, the man credited with inventing baseball, was a Union officer at Castle Pinckney. He once commented that they were so close to Charleston, they could easily lob mortars into the city. Does that sound like they were protecting the ports, or threatening them? Fort Sumter was nearly completed when Major Robert Anderson snuck in the middle of the night with 2 companies of soldiers. That translates to 300 or 400 men. They were ordered to vacate, but refused to move for another 2 months. Finally, Southern militia spotted a Northern ship, the Star of the West, bringing reinforcements to Fort Sumter. The Confederate militia fired at the ship, loaded with 200 soldiers, munitions, and supplies, forcing it to turn back. Then they fired on Fort Sumter to drive the Union Army out. Today, historians blame the South for starting the Civil War, saying, they fired the first shot, but the aggression was already initiated by the North. So the North was about to lose its tariff money. It had just lost the income it generated through the domestic slave trade, and was no longer benefiting from the Atlantic slave trade. So in 1861, Abraham Lincoln created the federal income tax. Any worker earning over $800 would be required to pay the Union government. At the time, Northern factory workers earned only $450 per year, and would still earn less than $750 as late as 1920. So who would pay taxes as a wage earner? Southern blacks. If Lincoln had actually freed the slaves, and allowed them to migrate into Northern states, he would have to pay them before he could tax them. Plus they would have to earn nearly twice as much as the average factory worker, just to be taxed. So he intended to keep black people in the South, so he could tax them without having to pay them. Lincoln's plan was to rename the slaves sharecroppers, and allocate 1/3 of a plantation's earnings as their share. Allow me to reveal the math. A typical plantation made $150,000 per year selling cotton. 1/3 of that, or $50,000, would be listed as the workers' share. If a plantation had 50 slaves, that comes to $1,000 per man. This easily surpasses the $800 minimum required to pay the federal income tax. So once again, the South would be paying money to the North.